Y'all, I'm so excited with how this turned out. From yokieB.com. Welcome to my channel where I share crochet and knitting patterns and tutorials, as well as finished projects and lots of fun fiber things. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm excited to share all the details about my niece's shirt that she asked me to make. I was super excited that she asked me to make it. Also a little nervous because anytime somebody asks you to make something, you want it to be exactly what they're hoping for. And so I was super excited, but also a little nervous that I wasn't going to be able to deliver. But I am very happy with the outcome. So let's dive into the details, and I will share 3 tips that I have for trying to turn a photo into something for yourself or somebody else. Have you ever been scrolling through Pinterest and you see a picture of a crocheted or knitted item that you absolutely love, but you cannot find a pattern anywhere for it, and so you really want to make something as close to that picture as possible, but you don't know where to start? Well, hopefully these 3 tips will help you at least have a jumping off point in making some of these things for yourself. Now, I want to preface this by saying if you can find a pattern for the garment or accessory or home decor item that you are trying to make, I highly recommend purchasing that pattern. It supports the designer. As a pattern designer myself, I know how much it means when someone purchases your pattern, so I definitely always want to recommend supporting the handmade community in that way if you can. I actually look for a pattern for this top before I even went into trying to make it myself. I did not find one. I didn't even find anything that was exactly similar. Of course, there are other like check tops, but I didn't see anything that was identical to this particular top. So I couldn't find that. And then I decided to purchase a vintage pattern on Etsy that I thought might give me kind of a jumping off point. But after studying further the details of this shirt, I decided that I didn't really need that pattern, but I'm excited to have that pattern because I am definitely planning on making it in the future. It is so cute. I will link it down below if you want to check it out. I always love seeing vintage patterns. They are so fun. I actually have another crocheted like cardigan, a large cardigan pattern, kind of like a coat, almost like a crochet coat, that I definitely want to make in the future. I will also link that down below if you want to check it out. But I want to for sure first recommend that you purchase the pattern. It will take the guesswork out of sizing and trying to figure it out yourself. But if you cannot find the pattern, then this is another way that you can go about getting inspired and trying to make that particular thing for yourself or a gift. So my tip number 1 in recreating something you have seen in a picture is study that picture. Saw this picture, I thought that surely there would be a pattern for it because you see these checks everywhere, all over Pinterest, all over YouTube. But when I couldn't find the pattern and I purchased the other pattern thinking that it would be a good jumping off point, the more I studied the picture, the more I could tell that it was worked flat. It just had straps and a neckline, and I thought I can totally do this. I don't need a pattern for it. The things that you can find out from the picture are what stitches were used, whether it was worked in the round or worked flat. You can tell if there are extra embellishments that were added. You can tell if it's tapestry or intarsia. You can tell what size yarn was used. So I highly recommend just studying the picture or item. Like if you go into a store and see an item that you want to try to recreate at home, just kind of study it and see how you could recreate it. So I figured out with this top that it was worked flat. It had 2 panels and just straps and a neckline. And also I figured out that I needed to use intarsia for the checks. I thought that would be the cleanest and easiest way. Now let me tell you, there were ends for days, but it was so worth it, and the end result is super fun and cute. So that is my first tip. Just study the picture, see if you can figure out how it was made. Now if it's a home decor item or an accessory like a scarf or a bag or something like that, that will be even easier probably because you won't have to worry about sizing and things like that. I think just kind of figuring out out and kind of working through it in your mind to see how you can recreate what they have in the picture. You can see how it fits, if it tapers at the waist. So for instance, in this picture, I noticed that it did not taper at the waist, but it seemed to kind of flare out, which means it was probably just a square because the bust is larger than the waist in this particular case. And so these are just things that you can kind of figure out in your head, and it gives you kind of a starting point to get going on the project for yourself. Diving into the yarn details specifically, I could tell that this shirt was kind of a thinner weight yarn. I was thinking probably around a DK, so that's where I started when I hopped on Lovecrafts and kind of checked out some of the yarns they had. My niece wanted the colors that were pretty close to the picture, and so I was super excited to find really close colors. This green is Rico Rumi, and it is just the prettiest color. Oops, let's see if it'll focus. There we go. If you saw my yarn organization video, then you've already seen these yarns. I hadn't even started her shirt yet, but I did have these. And then King Cole Cotton was the kind of off-white color that I chose. And I believe this is Ecru. And I'm not sure exactly the color of this. Oh my goodness, can you guys hear my bunny in the background? These look like really great options to me, and I thought that the colors were perfect, and I was super excited to use both of these. And so I will link them down below if you'd like to check them out. They're both great yarns. I had never used them before, so I'm super excited to have used both of these now. I'm also excited to have a little bit extra. Now I do have to say that the vintage pattern did help me get an idea of the yardage for this pattern. It looked like a similar size, and so I just kind of added up what I needed. Of course, I only used 2 colors for this one, and there's several colors in the vintage pattern. But I was excited to get at least an idea of the yardage that I would need. So once you figured out how the garment or accessory is most likely made from studying the picture, now it's time to measure. This is going to be a little bit more complicated because you're going to need some key measurements such as the bust and the sleeve length and things like that. But if you're just making an accessory or a home decor item, then it will be a little bit easier. Like if you're making a blanket or a pillow, then you can decide what size you specifically want that for yourself, and then you can go from there. So for this particular tank top, I knew that I needed the bust measurement and also the length. Specifically the length from the shoulder to the waist where my niece wanted her top to hit. And so I figured that it was kind of a cropped top with, you know, like high-waisted jeans. It's like the picture. I thought that was probably how she wanted it to fit. So she gave me those specific measurements. From there, I was able to go ahead and make my gauge swatches and figure out what size I needed to make it. I also could figure out the hook size that I wanted to use. So with these swatches, I went ahead and made one for each of the yarns. So when I found both of these yarns on Lovecrafts, I wanted to make sure that I found DK weight yarns that had the same gauge or very, very similar. So both of these did, but I still wanted to double check and make sure, because I think, especially if you're making something for somebody else, it is so good to have all the groundwork laid so that it's just an easier process. So I went ahead and made a gauge swatch with each of the yarns and figured out that I wanted a 3.25 millimeter hook. The hook size that was suggested for the yarn was 3 to 4, so 3.25 millimeter is where I landed. And this top was actually a little bit easier because it is all squares. So essentially you're just making a square for the front, square for the back. I figured out what size I wanted to make the squares, and I decided on about 1-inch squares, and then how many of those 1-inch squares I would need to fit into that panel. So that's kind of how I figured out how to make this particular top. And so you can kind of do the same thing. It might not be quite as easy if you're not making just an all square top, but the same rules apply. So you figure out the measurements that you need, you can figure out your gauge from that measurement, you can see how many of your particular stitches with whatever size crochet hook or knitting needle you're using you need to make that particular size, and then you can kind of go from there. I know that it is not always fun to figure out gauge, but honestly it is so important when you are making certain things. Some things you kind of just wing it, like if you were making a scarf and you just needed to decide the length, width might just be a little bit different, and that's okay, it doesn't matter. But when you're making a garment or something very specific, gauge is so important. And I know that that is not fun, because gauge is never fun. You always just want to dive in and never want to make gauge. At least I do. I don't know if that's you. If it is you, comment down below and let me know. Gauge is is so frustrating because especially if you're excited about something, you just want to dive right in and not worry about gauge. But seriously, gauge is like everything. It'll save you so much time and headache in the end, and you'll be so happy that you took that extra hour or however long it takes you to make that gauge swatch. So my third and final tip is to try it on as you go. Isn't always going to work if you're making a gift for someone and your measurements are completely different. My niece actually has very similar measurements to me, so it worked really well and it was easy for me to kind of try it on myself and see if it was going to work for her. But it will be a lot harder if you are making it for somebody else, if you cannot try it on them. Now, if you can try it on them and they know about it and they live near you, then they could come over and try it on. You know, that's the way you do it in sewing all the time. You come over for fitting so that you can make sure that it fits. But I highly recommend doing this as you go so that if something is off at all, then you can kind of frog it in the beginning and not go through the entire process of making the garment and it doesn't fit and you were super sad. Now, if this is a home decor item or an accessory, this will be a little bit easier. If you are trying to fit a pillow form or if you want it to be the size of another blanket that you have, then you can kind of measure as you go and see if it's looking the way you want. So I definitely recommend that you should kind of gauge it as you're going to see if you are going in the right direction. That way it will save you a lot of time in the end and you won't get super frustrated and just like never want to pick it up again. So kind of measure it. If it is something you can try on, do it. If it's for yourself, that way you can know if you need to add a few more stitches or things like that. Thank you guys so much for joining me and checking out my finished project that I made for my niece. It was just such a fun thing to make for her. I will insert a picture of her at the end here so you can see. I have not seen it on her yet at this point when I'm making this video. I'm super excited to give it to her. Than I had anticipated, but it was so worth it. And I hope that these just 3 basic tips will give you kind of a jumping off point to start making some of those things that you've seen in pictures, things that you so want for yourself, but you can't find a pattern and you can't find it anywhere, but you just want to make it yourself. I hope that this inspires you to kind of go for it. Of course, if you have any questions or if there's anything I can answer, please put it in the comments down below. I would love it if you would hit that like button and subscribe to join me for all the fun crochet and knit things. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!